subject this evening, and no personal ones about my wife along those lines. Just walking out, isn't he? Walking out. Guilty conscience. Guilty conscience. Philip.
You mentioned the ladies.
The ladies.
Asking the questions. You mentioned his wife. What about his mother? His father had been taken away on the ship to the United States. Presumably he was left behind with his mother. My question is, do you know anything about his mother, and did he have siblings as well?
He did have an older brother. I'm recalling now the scant biographical details we do have. And if I recall correctly, his brother thought that his younger brother showed great signs of grace and interest in the truth, and reckoned that he should seriously consider the ministry. About his mother, all I recall, because there's little known, is that she was a godly woman. What intrigues me about his family life is how he came to marry this woman, the one he did. I just don't know about that at all. The sources don't say. Julian.
Presumably, this John Locke and James Alness, as individual men, had a lot of influence in Scotland at that time.
That's interesting. John Locke had influence in Scotland because John Locke was a very learned man. And now we're moving into the English Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment. He had a lot of influence, especially in the more learned centres. James Fraser, being based in Alness in Rossshire, was ecclesiastically in a backwater. You could say, and even Scots would have said at that time, perhaps, that he was in the back end of beyond. And what amazes me is that in his little country parish, that he was reading such heavy works, keeping abreast of that sort of theological literature, and was a profound enough scholar that he could answer them in their own terms and put them to the sword too. He really did.
There were lots of people who had read his work.
Lots of people have read Alness's work. Yes, it was a much read work in later times, and so, as John MacLeod says, a classic in Scottish theology, and one of the other sources mentioned, widely influential. Yep. And that was why I cited some Scottish and English and American commentators who had read it and been impressed by it. Any other thoughts or comments? Dale?
Not a question, a comment. It was so interesting for me to learn that John Locke spent time in Holland and both influenced and was influenced by the Arminians. And it immediately called to mind for me the common bit of wishful thinking among American conservatives that our country is a Christian country, which is nonsense to begin with, because most of the founding fathers were deists. But even if you're willing to make the stretch that our nation is a Christian nation, then it is, if it's influenced by Locke, it's an Arminian and a Pelagian nation. And that was just fascinating.
Yes. I too am very interested in the exchange of ideas. It was striking to me that it happened to be a dictionary of philosophy that mentioned this connection between the Arminians and not some theological work tracing the origin of his ideas, or at least the reinforcing of his ideas.
Right.
Locke, the Arminians in the Netherlands, is a fascinating connection.
Yeah, because Locke's idea of the tabula rasa is classic Pelagianism.
Yes, very close to the idea of the Pelagians that were born into this world neutral, and that it's not in any way nature, it's entirely nurture. So that, and this is the basis of secularism and secular education theory, that if only you can teach the children enough, if only you can teach them the right things, if only you can teach them early enough, they will turn out to be virtuous citizens, because man is perfectible. And if we can discipline, though never with any sort of corporal discipline, if we can discipline and direct them, then we can bring man to a higher level.
But it's all about putting people in a good environment. That's so much of modern society, public education, for example, is obviously pelagian. Because it's all about, if we put people in a good environment, they'll turn out to be good people.
Definitely, very well put. Sam and then John.
Maybe you touched on this subject, but what exactly, with all these liberal attacks on true doctrine, did James Fraser decide to write particularly on this subject? Do you know?
None of the material that I found on him, his own work or the biographical notes, specifically said. I hinted in my paper, because I think it could hardly have failed to dawn upon him, that others were dealing with other aspects. And I think for us at this conference, and professors have brought this out well too, we don't usually think about the assaults on our sanctification by way of false doctrine and the proper response to it. And I think Fraser saw a lacunae, but that's just intelligent guesswork, because we don't have a lot of biographical details. Sam wants to follow up, yeah?
How did people discover his work? I mean, with him being in the backwater and all this?
His manuscript was there after they died, as is the case with any deceased. They went through it, they saw this was prepared for publication, and then with a huge sigh of relief, one assumes they discovered that it was legibly written, with hardly an emendation, hardly needing any proofing. I mean, Reverend McGowan and I hear that and we think, wonderful, wonderful, because we have to edit the British Reformed Journal. Wonderful, a document coming that needs hardly any proofreading. And I think they probably took that document and thought, let's run to the press as quickly as possible. This needs so little work, we can get this thing out to the reading public. That's at least how I envisage it. Yeah. John?
Did James Fraser ever make it to America?
Did his son? No, his son didn't. His father was born in Scotland, ended up in London. He went to England because of Charles II, who was a Romanizing and Stewart monarch. Pressure, killing times, difficulty in Scotland. He thought it'd be a bit safer. His father went, so he thought it'd be a bit safer. Then went to London and then got into hot water. Then went back to Scotland to another castle via Edinburgh. Then he goes to New Jersey. Then he goes north to Connecticut. Then he sails back to Scotland. So there's quite a bit of movement there. But the son, born in Alness, lived the first 11 years there. Then 15 years later, for the next 15 years, went with his father. His father's dead. But he would have moved along. We're not told much about them. And then back in Alness. So his journeys were really, really limited. I mean, is there anybody here who spent 54 years of their life in the one house? As I said, I'm assuming that the manse, Richard Holt, 54. How many years, Richard?
I won't tell you how many years.
But all your life. All your life in the one house.
Yes.
And you probably can tell what every sound and sigh means and where it's coming from in your home. My mother reckoned she could. Any sound in the house, she knew what it was and where it was coming from. And she didn't spend all her life in the one house. But maybe that's just a woman thing. That wasn't deprecation, by the way, in case anybody thinks that. That's Marco.
Yeah, you said that the exegesis of John Locke of Romans is similar or very similar to the interpretation that N.T. Wright gives or makes of Romans.
More of a clarification here. I said the similarity lay not in that they were saying the same things, but they were proposing a radical overhaul. You know, Locke's view, if it had been right, would have been, you know, Luther, the Reformers, all totally wrong. His view of Romans 5, 6, and 7, they're the passages we're focusing on now. Whereas, if you read a commentary by N.T. Wright or anything he's written about the book of Romans, I mean, it nearly makes your head spin. You think, what the world is this man talking about? It's the same radical revisionism. So what N.T. Wright is doing with his reconstruction of Romans and reconstruction of Christian theology, John Locke was doing something very similar. And he wasn't the only one either. I mean, there were others who've tried to reinvent the Christian faith. For instance, if you want to reinvent the Christian faith with a new presentation, given that the book of Romans is the foundational theology of Christianity, you have to interact with the book of Romans. There's no other way to do it, really.